Good morning, everybody. This is August 26th, 2020, and we're on episode 82 of
Yes, good
Transmission.
morning. 82. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
lot.
that's a big number.
Who would have thunk it?
Like I was looking over our previous episodes, and we did have an episode, I think 35. We talked about going back to normal. So this is a recurring of a theme, but it's like, in a way, it's been the theme this whole time. Like
Right.
how the ways in which we kind of accept bad things. and how do we resist them? Like that's kind of the bigger issue. Like when you talk about justice, I was thinking about this, like how we uh, all our longings all have a progressive tendency, but like reality tends to be conservative in the sense that it doesn't take much imagination to accept the way things are, but it takes a lot of imagination to change the way things are. And so, right in this moment, uh, with everything bad going on, it takes extra energy and effort just to not rest and get into a really bad conciliatory posture with oppression. So that's why we exist as a podcast, to
That's
challenge that.
right.
Yeah.
That was really good, Mark. You were on a rhetorical roll there.
Thanks.
But who are we?
Who are any of us? I'm Mark Van Steenhoek. I'm the director for the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. Good morning, Kathleen, and everybody else that is out there. Commenting or lurking or both. So we're kind of about 6 months into this pandemic thing, right? Isn't that right? Like March, April, May, June, July, August. Yeah, just about 6 months in. And right in days of yore, there was this fantasy that we would go back to normal. And there was a great hope for that. Our great leader, Kim Jong-Trump, thought that on Easter, all the churches would open up and we would have this glorious return to normalcy. And there was there's this tremendous yearning for that and pressure for that. And now 6 months in, there's no going back to whatever normal was. There just seems to be this ever unfolding progression into some kind of new normal, which doesn't necessarily feel better than what the old normal was.
Well,
but this is one of these weird things, is how you notice, at least I notice, myself, people around me, people that I talk to, sort of starting to just act like, okay, this is what it is. And, I've just got to function within that. And to me personally, it's a very odd feeling. So we thought we'd spend a little time with that today.
Well, it's weird because what was normal before the pandemic wasn't normal. So we were already kind of accepting. So this kind of the Trump era, like before that, it's like you keep going back. You can keep going back ad infinitum. Like there were already bad things that we accepted as we kind of normalized crisis, because the United States is a history of crises, one after another. And a new normal is what happens after a crisis when people try to recalibrate. And so we're now in the midst of one that we get to, it's almost like it gets drawn out and we get to see it and analyze it a bit more than we have with previous crises, or at least for white people. I feel like white people, we've been a little more oblivious to these crises.
Yeah, so I think we should pause and maybe define this word normal, because like I'm already seeing Julia's comment and then your comment about things weren't normal. So I I have a very functional definition of this term. Basically, normal is whatever's going on. Because I think otherwise, to me, the definitions just get very abstract. So, like Julia says, you could throw her comment up there. There was no normal for people living under the tyranny of poverty and race oppression. Well, no, I would say that is what was normal.
Doesn't mean it was good.
Yeah. So normal does not mean good. Normal does not mean good. To me, normal simply means the statistical whole of whatever is happening at that point in time. And obviously, there are many experiences within that, right? So not everybody's having the same experience, right? So people living under the tyranny of poverty and race oppression, their normal feels one way. People who are living on the shores of Lake of the Isles, their normal feels very different. And but that is all normal because that is what is happening at that time.
I tend to look at normal as like a more of a sociological, there's a level of acceptance. So you have these norms, these things that are kind of put out there, and to the extent to which we conform to them, that's how something gets normalized. So maybe I'm talking more about the process of normalization, how that happens, because what generally everyone agrees to be normal. Like you're right, racism is normal in America,
right?
There's established norms that kind of predicts it, and so we only notice, white people in particular only tend to notice racism when it becomes abnormal, which is outside what they experience regularly. So all of a sudden, seeing videos of some man getting killed by police, then they get upset. A lot of people of color were upset well before that, but even within the Black community, there are people who normalized that stuff, and to the point where they couldn't feel it anymore. So that's the process that bothers me a little bit when we're talking about, in this COVID moment of rising neo-fascism. What do we accept and what don't we? Right. And of course, normal is changing statistically, whether we like it or not. New things, new ways of being are kind of establishing themselves.
Yeah. Well, right. And that's what people do. And that's why this term normalizing, comes to be, because we've got some state of existence. And again, so Julia says, here, you pull up her next comment, it's chaos when you have low control over your living conditions. Right. But so we can describe the aspects of normal. And for people who have no control over your living conditions, part of normal is constant chaos. That's what that is. It's constant instability. It's constant oppression. It's constant abuse of one kind or another. And what we do is we normalize that, and that human beings just get used to a certain state, right? And we see this with people experiencing homelessness. The fact that we've got all these tents up in our parks all over Minneapolis, and those of us that don't live in those tents just walk by or drive by, and it's normal, right? This is now normal. And some people go and try to help, and some people do some things, but this has just now become, oh yeah, this is the way it is. And there isn't some giant outcry, or there aren't thousands and thousands of people flooding City Hall and flooding city council meetings going, this is an abomination. We need to find these people real places to live. Everybody's just like, oh yeah, okay, well, as long as there are only 25 tents in the park, that's okay. That's a new normal. Right. So yeah, I mean, we as human beings are constantly adjusting to whatever the general status quo is. And as you said in the beginning, to engage our energy and imagination to create something different is really hard.
And I think this is important to linger on this point, because I think often among radical types, people who want the norm to be changed dramatically, It's easy to feel like we have to make that happen by exertion of our will. And if we can't see that happen, we're failures. So I wanted to underscore the point you just made, that it's hard. Right. I mean, but this is why it's such a gift. Like I'm thinking of prophets. Prophets are people who call out the norm and say, this is not a good norm. According to what you say you're about, we should be doing this. Or one of my favorite kind of tropes through history are the holy fools, who just act like norms don't exist. So everyone from Dostoevsky's The Idiot, somebody who walks around who believes what they're told is true, and then so they see a homeless person and they're shocked, right? They just can't even believe it. Why does this person not have a house? And so they don't operate from the norm. They operate from a set of convictions and values. Things that people that do that like are always seem crazy, but it reveals the shittiness of our norms. And so, So we're in a moment like that where I think we're all feeling the tension of like, oh my God, I would care a lot about how bad these norms are and what's the shitty reality we're living in. But I only have 3 spoons, and I have to spend 2, using spoon theory for people who aren't following along with this, how much energy you have in a day. I only have enough energy to make myself meals and go to the bathroom. I don't have energy to deal with all these mounting crises. So it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I was really thinking about this, there was a rally the other day downtown around this latest police shooting. And, there were, I don't know, maybe at the height of it, there were a couple of hundred people there, but it was really small. And the other thing is that usually Deborah and I are the only old white people there, right? So the white people with wealth and power, who actually probably have plenty of time because they're retired and they've got money, they don't come out to these things. And yeah, the sense was like, oh my God, we just don't have energy to do this again. Like, we did this, we did it for George Floyd, we did it for a couple of weeks. It was exhausting. Now, oh my gosh, we got to do this again. No, I'm not going to. And so that's that feeling. I often feel like it's like wading through molasses or cement, right? This move to become normal, like just make it be okay. It's this hypnotic thing, right? We're seeing this with the GOP convention, which is just this terrifying fascist display that it's just like, it's okay. Dear leader and his family want to take care of you. Everything will be fine. We'll pardon you. We'll let you come to America. We'll be totally honest. Just listen to us. Everything will be fine. It's like, no, it will not be fine.
Here's a comment from Gus.
Yeah.
One of my favorite icebreakers for Zoom meetings is, what is a single good thing that has come out of COVID? Many answers end up being a very qualified good, like spending more time with kids, even though they're having to now juggle work, childcare.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know exactly what your angle was, Gus, on that observation, but my angle on this is that this is a collective attempt to adjust to the new normal, right? So if I can say what is good in this, then I'm like, okay, well, I can deal with this. I can make it through. And that again is this process of everybody settling in. And I can't tell you the number of people have been like, well, okay, I guess we just have to do this stuff. I'm kind of prepared to get sick, but everybody else is doing it. Now you have like COVID resentment, right? Where people are just like, well, I'm trying to behave. We've talked about this before, Mark, and then you see all these people like, well, my friends went to a party last week. So, fuck, I need to go to a party too. I want to go to a party. Like, why am I being good? And so all of that then just starts to, yeah, well, this is what's now the new normal. We just have these hot spots. We have 1,000 people dying every day. Like it's all okay. It's all okay.
The other day we go for walks, and we're also like every other day we try to do a jog. We're trying to do this Couch to 5K app thing as a family, and we saw some bar, somewhere near Uptown. They had a patio, kind of private party apparently, and no one was wearing masks back there, and they weren't social distancing, and I doubt they're all like live in one house together. So I was like just full of resentment, like right out and open, go do that in a barn or something. But then as we're walking back, when we're walking, we don't wear masks. We wear masks when we go into places. That's the practice we have. And if we see some people walk by someone, we give them space. But sometimes you run into those families that they all wear masks no matter where they go outside. And those people end up just looking at us with that same resentment. Like, how dare you not wear a mask out when you're outside? And I'm like, oh my God, this is, we're part of this hierarchy of pandemic oppression. There's someone lower than us on it.
So we got
some comments here. Julie agrees. Yes, people normalize the suffering of our neighbors. That happens all the time. For some of my unhoused friends, reduction of move along orders, for example.
Right. So we say, well, we don't move them along as much, so that's somehow good.
Mm-hmm. Julia finger snap, something I said earlier, or everything I've said.
Yeah, everything you've said, Mark, is worth a finger snap.
Yeah,
we can normalize. We can normalize that.
Yes, let's do it. Maria writes, I have been having a discussion about the intersection of racism and industrialization. The following is a small segment of my response. I find engaging in these conversations time-consuming and exhausting, even if they are done in a friendly manner. I struggle to know how and when to persist. Yes, industrialization has given us some short-term gains, but at an enormous long-term cost. We have not used the benefit of industrialization. The benefit industrialization has given us well. We have mostly squandered it on hedonistic. I don't know where it goes from there. Just a reminder that if you write a comment that's over a certain length, it'll cut off and we won't be able to see the rest of it.
Yeah.
But just kind of going along with that, like this idea that even industrialization, we can't imagine a world now, most of us can't, that's not industrialized. No. And so how can we even begin to imagine a world that's different than this? Like industrialization is one of the most basic things about modern life. And we know statistically, that probably caused this climate change shit, but we can't imagine. The only way most people could imagine getting past it is to think we have to become hyper industrial to the point where we create things that somehow benefit the environment.
Yeah. Well, and see, to me, the point you're making, Maria, kind of the 2 points, right? The exhaustion of the conversation and the struggle, and then this particular observation about this one issue. To me, I feel like this is where the other piece that's so important to bring in here is spiritual life and practice, right? Because I think that one of the reasons a lot of the conversations and the various things become exhausting, right, is what you were talking about, Mark, that it's all up to us and our will. We've got to figure this out. We got to fix it. We then obviously don't do that. And so then it's like we just fall on the floor in a little puddle going, I'm a failure and this sucks and I should just become a hedge fund manager instead. And what our spiritual life and practice does to me in relationship to this are 2 things. One is we become comfortable with our smallness and our powerlessness. And then also we're tapping into a much deeper source of energy and power that is pushing towards and pointing towards, and this is where imagination comes in, what are these alternatives, right? So we're doing both at the same time. we're settling in and sort of accepting our relative powerlessness, but we also continue to be inspired by the imagination of what is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the glimpses of that, right? So, and I think when Jesus talked about the kingdom of God being right there, or it just passed by, you missed it, there it was.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of what he was pointing towards. But yeah, if I'm just relying on my own will, there's no way. And again, if I think about, all the people that I was activists with in college, the vast majority of them are not activists anymore. Stopped being activists a long time ago. Just like, this isn't working. This is dumb. I'm going to go do something else. Very, very common.
Mm-hmm. Catherine writes, aren't there situations in which normalization can be beneficial? Yeah. For example, some of the houses people who are shocked by homelessness turn that sense of abnormal into advocating for really violent policies instead of recognizing the humanity of others. And same with a lot of oppressive outcry about LGBTQ and disabled people having the audacity to exist.
Something went a little wonky there.
Yeah, I feel like there was a
flow.
Not exactly.
It may have been the gloved hand auto correcting. But yeah, I think that normalization to me is, one, it's a survival mechanism, so it's beneficial in that sense. But yeah, our experience of normalization of evil can be motivating for something different. And I don't know if that's what you were getting at.
Well, and then normalization is just, this is why conservatives hate having gay people on TV, because they know that it helps normalize that.
Right.
And to a large degree it has. I'm not saying there isn't homophobia and transphobia that's rampant. It's still very rampant. But at the same time, there are places where it's not as abnormal to see that because it's become more normalized. And so I think normalization I think it's human nature to try to create an equilibrium for a community to thrive and to not pay attention to things that cause perpetual pain. And then it causes trauma, and this gets weaponized against us, this tendency, all the time. But we can, if we know how the sausage is made, as it were, we can make different sausage. I don't know, the metaphor broke down there. We understand. We understand how this works. So even though we know it's messing with us, we can kind of say, no, we're going to try to establish a different set of norms, ones that don't cause people to have to live in a tent in the park unless that's what they really want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen, I pastor two churches a few miles apart with totally different worldviews. Yeah, there's so many stories I'm sure you have from this. We've only gotten a little glimpse. Every Sunday, I wonder how much longer I can do this. I spent 2 hours Monday working on a mandala. It's the only thing keeping me sane.
Right. Yeah, and so that's just a great example of how multifaceted any given societal normality really is. Right? And we do talk about how people, groups of people, individuals live in different worlds. Even within families, right? People have totally different experiences of the same family. And so, but interestingly, one of the processes of normalization is to try to pretend that none of those different experiences exist. Right. So, normalization occurs on many, many levels. And so all the people at that bar that are doing their COVID party, they're in this world of just okay, well, we're doing this and it's okay. None of us are dying, and maybe somebody gets a little sick, and those people walking by are giving us dirty looks, but whatever, we don't care. This is now our new normal.
Mm-hmm. Catherine writes, I think our status quo sees so many totally normal human experiences as abnormal, from body hair to aging to being fat. Well, not just, what we mean by the norm in our society, generally speaking, is centered around the people who have the most social power. So norm is centered around whiteness, and that's causes all kinds of things. But like, yeah, especially like things like body hair. That's a weird one. I remember when so I moved from rural Minnesota to South Minneapolis, and all of a sudden women I noticed had hairy legs. And I was like surprised by that because that was not normal in rural Minnesota, like where women are supposed to be smooth everywhere, I guess. Right. And it took me a while to like allow that to settle in and not have like this reaction to it. It's bizarre how this stuff works.
Yeah, and see, then I had the opposite experience, right? So growing up in California in the 60s and the 70s, I was just like, yeah, we've already worked this out, right? Like body hair on women is fine.
Yeah.
And then I come to the Midwest and suddenly I'm like, oh my God, I'm like back in the 1950s and 40s, right? That where this is not okay, you know, moving to Northwest Minnesota at first and then moving down here. And then it's kind of like, oh, phew, yeah, okay, I guess. But how even here, it's obviously still an issue.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so then there's this time warp of normality. I feel like I've, you know, boomeranged 30, 40 years. Yeah, it's very fascinating.
And that whole time it was the norm for men to have body hair. And so, which just goes to show you how who norms serve often. Next Maria is finishing her comment from earlier, talking about industrialized society. Being squandered on hedonistic living for mostly white people, that is. We have convinced ourselves that industrialization is the only way we could have achieved those benefits. We have convinced ourselves that we can escape the long-term consequences. We have convinced ourselves that everyone needs to follow our path of industrialization, and therefore all our intentional policies encourage others to do the same. But it trails off there.
Yeah.
The
white people.
Yeah, this is usually how it works. People often tend to assume that what is enough of a justification for itself. Like, so, oh, well, this is just how it is. It can't be any other way. And then we think, well, capitalism is like, what else? We can't do better because the only alternative is like this. And then we use bad examples to justify, using what is to justify itself. And that really short circuits the struggle for justice when we can't even imagine like not having a currency-driven economy that's based on debt.
Right.
Adam writes, something my friend says sticks with me. Just because you don't have the power to go out into the world and magically change everything does not mean you don't have power.
Right.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah. Julia writes, and what in the hell are these naked vaginas all about anyways?
Yeah, Julia, I have no idea. That's another one that's totally I don't get. I don't get. So we have nothing to offer on that. At all.
Adam writes, the opportunities we have for change likely won't look like what we imagine. To your point about missing the kingdom of God, I think of a line from a hip hop song. Ask God for a plane, then I look to the sky, then he sent me a boat while I'm asking him why. The plane hasn't come yet, the boat's passing me by. Yeah, and to me, this is why I'm an advocate, and Dan's an advocate for like the spiritual life or the practice of discernment. I do value like reading science fiction where people are futurists. They imagine things, how they could be, and they come up with possible systems. I think that's helpful for creating flexibility and creativity in the mind. But at the end of the day, we don't start with a blueprint and then create from that, right? This is one of the big problems with how Marxism has functioned. Marx was describing a natural process as he saw it, and then people took it as a blueprint and let's make this shit happen. And then it kind of doesn't work that way. You can't blueprint the future.
No.
But you can discern and respond and move.
To what is happening and to what is life-giving. Yeah, and that's one of the roles of artists, right? Is you know, and we got a lot of artists that are regularly part of our crew here. You know, Adam and Catherine are great artists. Julia's a great artist. And artists give us a certain vision that is this interesting mix of what is happening, what we don't see, and what may be to come.
Yeah.
And it's sort of in that great amalgam of things that that we can kind of inch and crawl our way forward bit by bit.
Adam writes, I think about the opportunity we have to recalibrate what we accept as normal, as we are able to see how quickly what we thought of as normal is permanent, crumbles in our current circumstances.
Right. Yeah, and that's a very important piece to always remember, and this is something that the ego process is always trying to help us forget, is that whatever configuration of normal we're facing, it is not ultimately solid. I mean, it may be solid in that it's having a tremendous effect on us and other people, and it may be creating huge amounts of suffering, but it is not fundamentally solid. And so there always are other possibilities. But we, again, there's this huge desire, and like I'm in touch with lots of pastors right now, and man, I mean, being a pastor of a church right now is unbelievably hard because you've got all these people who are trying to force things back to normal, right? To the old normal. Like, let's just get back in the church on Sunday and let's just sing our hearts out and let's just cuddle up to each other and, let's just get back to normal. And there's this unbelievable pressure to solidify things that is incredibly unhealthy.
This will be, I think, our last word. We're going to end mostly on time-ish this time. Catherine writes, it's so weird as an American to remember that on a global history scale, pandemics are a normal and predictable happening. But our systems already act like getting sick is not a normal, predictable human experience. That's one of the great, horrible things about our late modern consumer capitalist society is it creates a norm that's most beneficial to the bottom line of the wealthy, and then asks us to conform to that when it's not realistic at all. Like even the idea of maybe working 40 hours a week is I don't think that's normal throughout human history to force that. But we already think that if we aren't willing to even do overtime, then we probably don't even deserve to pay rent. Like it's already this sort of bizarre way of thinking that, oh, you only work part-time, I guess you don't get to eat, and that's normal.
Right. But think about this as we close, that the average American in our wealthy, wonderful, perfect, beautiful society works more than the average medieval peasant did.
And those lords had an obligation to feed and house them.
That's right.
So
there you have it.
There you have it. With that rosy note, we'll see you tomorrow. And tomorrow, we promise will be the best episode ever.
I don't promise that.
I do.
It'll just be a normal episode.
Yeah. See you tomorrow.
All right. See ya. Bye.